Hi, I'm Maria Shriver, and I'm a friend of Tim's. I've always wanted to go to a love fest. This isn't exactly what I had in mind, but the truth is, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else at this moment, which just shows you how important it is to get out of your mind and into your heart. My heart led me here today, as I know is the same for all of you. You see, I lost my heart to Timmy Russert the day I met him. And the entire time I knew him, he took care of it. He protected my heart when it needed protection. He nurtured it when it needed care. And he helped it grow. And he never, ever broke it. A rare man, indeed. I remember so well the day I showed up to work at NBC News. I had been fired 2 months earlier by CBS News. That's another story. But I walked in the doors of 30 Rock, and I have to admit I was wounded and quite scared. And Tim came up to me, put his big arm around me and took me to the side, and he whispered, "Look, I was also educated by the nuns. I was educated by the Jesuits. I'm Irish Catholic too. There aren't that many of us here in this building." He said, "But if we stick together, we'll be just fine." I looked at him and there was a little twinkle in his eye, but I knew he wasn't kidding. And I knew then and there that I had just gotten the last thing that I wanted in the world, but the thing I really needed, another brother. You see, I have 4 brothers already, so I know a little bit from what I speak. Brothers have an uncanny ability to make you think that you're nothing without them. Somehow brothers make you believe that you need them to make every decision in your life, large and small, that you can't go anywhere without their protection or make any decision without their input. I bet Tim's sisters would agree that Tim was exactly this kind of brother. I remember back when I scored an interview with Fidel Castro and I was going to Cuba, Tim came down from his vice president's office. He wasn't on the air at the time, and he came down to congratulate me. He sat down in the chair and started to talk to me. And by the time he was finished, he had convinced me that I couldn't go to Cuba without him. This despite the fact that I had traveled all over the world interviewing people before I ever met Tim Russert, but he somehow convinced me that I couldn't make the trip without him. He went on to convince me that I couldn't even do the interview without him, that I didn't know how to interview, even though I had just come from anchoring a live morning show and interviewing scores of newsmakers on my own. By the time he left my office, he had convinced me that it was he, not I, who had booked the interview, and that it was he who had actually sweated through all 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis alongside my uncles in the White House. The truth is, Tim prepared for that interview as though he were on the air. He studied all the briefing books that were made. He called up all the experts to the point when I would actually get them on the phone, they would say, "I don't have to talk to you. We've already briefed Tim Russert. Go talk to him." I marveled. I thought to myself, isn't that so sweet of Timmy? He wants to help me. He wants to make me shine. I didn't get it. He just wanted to go to Cuba and meet Castro. He didn't care at all about me. In fact, when we actually got to Cuba and Castro summoned us to his office in the middle of the night, Tim was the first one out of the door and the last one to leave the office. And when Castro actually said to me, "Okay, now I'm ready to do the interview," Tim was sitting in the chair and I said, "Tim, I'm doing the interview. Could you get up?" He goes, "Oh, I was just checking the lighting for you. I wasn't planning on sitting here." But he so loved being in the middle of the action. He so loved seeing history up close. And he loved to have stories to come back and share with everybody, to make you laugh, to make you feel as though you were there. Tim loved his life, and he loved life. I'm sure every single person in this auditorium today has an extraordinary story about Tim, a story that would make us all laugh, and a story that would touch us and probably make us cry. That's because Tim got into our lives. Deep into our lives. He knew about our troubles. He knew about our struggles. He knew about our triumphs. He knew about our families. Not too long ago, he called me when he heard that my daughter was interested in applying to Boston College. And he said, "Look, Maria, it's competitive at Boston College. You need to know people in Boston." You need to know people. Yeah. He said, you need to know people in the Catholic Church. You need me if you want your daughter to get into BC. I thanked him profusely and said, oh my God, you are so right. I grew up on the Cape. I don't know a person in Boston, and I've been educated in Catholic schools, and I don't know anybody in the church. Thank you, Tim. Please make sure my daughter gets into Boston College. She didn't. Anyway, she's going to kill me for saying that. She got waitlisted. Okay. Anyway, she's going to USC. Anyway, but Tim liked to help. That's a true story. I'm sorry, Catherine. But he loved helping people. He loved helping people who worked for him. He loved helping strangers. He loved anybody who he thought he could help. And with that famous Russert radar, he just knew who among us needed his help. When my uncle had a seizure a few weeks ago, the first phone call I got after my other brother, Timmy, was from Tim. He called me up and said, how's Teddy doing? And I talked to him, and then he said, now talk to me about you. Who's with you? How are you? What can I do for you? Are you all right? When my mother was going in and out of intensive care this past year, Tim kept tabs on her and on me. He talked with me about losing his own mother. He talked to me about what it felt, how hard it was for him. He talked to me about where he found support, about the role of his faith in that struggle. He shared his struggle with me so that mine would be a little bit easier. And because he was so devoted to his dad, he always called to check on mine. Tim and Maureen have a special place in my dad Sarge's life, and they would always call to find out how he was. And even when I would come into town and it was a Saturday night and invite them to come over, they always did. And my dad was always and is always so proud of Maureen, that she was one of the first women in this country to enlist in the Peace Corps, that she was so brave. And every time she would come over, he'd marvel at her and the school that was named after her and the legacy that she created. And he'd always say, I like that guy she married as well. And every time Tim would come over, my mother would say when he left, now that's the kind of jolly Irish Catholic boy I always thought, well, you would marry. What happened? That's true, but that's another story too. Tim was family, and his family is our family. And it really touched me that after I left NBC News, Tim always made sure that I felt as though I were still a part of the NBC family. At the last presidential conventions, which were the first ones that I didn't work at, he called me on my cell phone and he said, look, I know you're here at the Republican convention, and I'm thinking you might be feeling a little out of sorts in this new role of yours. So come on up here to the booth and hang with Tom and I, and we'll just kind of kibitz and bring your kids, and you'll be comfortable up here until you have to go down and hear Arnold's speech when you'll sit with all the Republicans. But sit up here with us because you'll be comfortable here. And he was right. He always made me feel comfortable, and I know every single person in this room can identify with that, because he always wanted all of us to feel comfortable with what we were doing, with the stories that we were sharing with him. That's what he wanted us to feel. And so here we are, feeling anything but comfortable, feeling lost, feeling sad, not understanding why we're here and Tim isn't. You know, every morning I begin my day reading a prayer from St. Teresa, and it begins like this. It says, may today there be peace within. May you trust God that you are exactly where you are meant to be. Still, it is hard for us to comprehend why we are meant to be here and Tim is not. Having lived through more than a few losses that defy understanding, I've learned that asking why doesn't help. The only thing that does help is leaning on your friends and leaning on your family, opening your heart, crying, and keeping your loved one alive in your heart and alive in your stories. And it helps to have faith like Tim. All of us here were meant to witness Tim's life. We were meant to be touched by it. We were meant to be touched by his humor, by his love, by his faith, by his idealism, by his passion, and most of all, by his compassion. Tim Russert had a larger than normal heart. Maybe it's because we were all occupying so much space in it, with the biggest part reserved for his family. Maureen and Luke, his incredible sisters, his mom, and of course, Big Russ. Maureen and Luke, I'd like to thank you for sharing Tim with everybody in this room, with everybody in this country. You were the light of his life. For me as a woman, it was a beautiful thing to behold the love he had for you, for your family, and the love that he had, the extraordinary capacity he had to love all of us and to make us feel loved. Tim, I want to thank you up there in heaven for making room in your heart for me. I will be forever grateful. A few years ago when my cousin died, John, in an unexpected way, I was given a poem by a friend that helped me through some pretty dark days. It gave me some peace within whenever I thought about him in a faraway place, that I would be unable to see him or talk to him again. I read it many, many times, and I thought I could share it with all of you today, with the hope that it might also give you some peace within. It goes like this. I stood watching as the little ship sailed out to sea. The setting sun tinted its white sails with a golden light. And as it disappeared from view, a voice at my side whispered, "He is gone." But the sea was a narrow one, and on the further shore, a little band of friends had gathered to watch in happy expectation. Suddenly, they caught sight of the tiny sail. And at the very moment when my companion had whispered, "He is gone," a glad shout went up in joyous welcome with the words, "Yeah, here he comes." God bless you. God bless you, Tim. Thank you.